Good afternoon, everybody. It's Steve Wilson at the State Water Survey. Thanks for joining us for WellCare 101, what you need to know to protect your family. We're at the State Water Survey at the University of Illinois, which, if you're not familiar, is a sister agency to our State Geological Survey, which most of you have heard of in your state. And Illinois is the only state really with a water survey. We house the state's well logs. We do a lot of applied research and public service related to community water supplies, groundwater, surface water, and private wells. This program is part of the private well class, which is privatewellclass.org. We're funded through the Rural Community Assistance Partnership by EPA. Okay, sorry. I switched screens and I shouldn't have done that because now I'm discombobulated. If you're an EHP, we do offer CE credit for this course, this webinar. We do offer it quite often because it's focused on well owners. And I've listed at the bottom the past webinars with the same core content. If you're familiar with our program, we spend a little over an hour probably presenting this core material, and the rest is answering questions you all have asked in advance when you registered. And so if you are looking for credit for NEHA or LEHP, we offer a certificate of attendance, copy of the slide deck, and working with the completed forms from NEHA. Just email us and tell us that you would like CEs for this, and we will get back to you. We are a small shop. There's really 2 of 3 of us that doing this work. And so be patient. And it is the end of the year, I realize that. But not everyone who attends today is going to get a certificate before the end of the year. That's just the way it is. The other thing I want to mention is we do record these, and we've had folks who want to watch the recording. You can't get CE credit for watching the recording. You have to attend live and participate. The software we use, GoToWebinar, tracks all that, so we know you're really here, all those sorts of things, and we can't do that with the video. So I think that's really it on that side of the fence. So a little bit about today. Again, this is a national program. We work with well owners all over the country, and we're kind of the online and base for private well owners. RCAP, the Rural Community Assistance Partnership, have staff in every state. They have 6 regional offices that are all nonprofits, and they have staff who can work directly with well owners. The materials today do follow the course, but this is not the private well class. That is a 10-lesson class you sign up for online, and it sends you a lesson once a week for 10 weeks through your email. And if you're interested in that, many times when we ask the question during our webinars, have you taken the class? A lot of folks say they have not. It's really the place to start, especially if you're a well owner. There's a lot of core material there. It's kind of a well owner 101, but it's much more material than we can cover in this 1.5 to 2 hour webinar. There will be time at the end for questions, or I should say that we're willing to stay and answer your questions as long as you ask and want us to. And so this webinar is scheduled to end at 3 Central Time, started at 1 Central Time, but sometimes because of questions we run over. We also will be answering a number of the questions that you asked whenever you registered for today. Not all of them, there's too many to answer everyone, and some are very similar. And so hopefully we've covered, the majority of what we need to do for that. A little bit about RCAP. I mentioned there's 6 regional offices. They're independent nonprofits that all work together with their national office in DC. Most of the funding they get is from federal agencies. They are mostly water and wastewater operators. They help small communities, those under 10,000, become sustainable, help them work on funding for infrastructure, work with their boards to help understand what their water systems are, give them advice on treatment, all those sorts of things. They're technical assistance providers, and they're funded by the federal government to help small communities stay viable without water or wastewater. there would be no small towns in America, right? And I'm from one. I grew up in a town, or near a town, on a farm of 350 people. So I certainly get all the issues they have compared to water systems and wastewater systems for large utilities. They also have staff who are private well experts. And so through this program, they work with folks in every state. They're willing to help put on workshops for well owners, partnering with health departments, labs, extension, you name it. If you're a well driller and you want to put on a workshop for well owners just to help them learn the basics, RCAP can help you do that. And they also do assessments, which these private well assessments, it's a tool we developed with a group of experts here at the U of I. It's like a vulnerability assessment of your well, and they'll come out in person, meet with you, look at your well, look at all the information, gather all the information there is available, whether you have a log or not, if you've ever tested or not, all those sorts of things, and then work with you to explain, why having and this is an extreme case, but it happens more than you believe, why it's not good just to have a Folgers can on top of as your well cap. It's not sealed. And we run into a lot of different things that we certainly have over the years. But they're there to help. They're all funded. It's all free, which is a really nice thing. They're willing to give 2 or 3 hours of their time to come to somebody's house and walk through everything about their water system with them to let them know and they're not selling anything, right? They're just trying to give you good advice and help you stay safe and keep your family safe and your drinking water safe. So we're at the State Water Service, I mentioned. Illinois decided to start a state water survey in 1895. So we're 128 years old, about to be 129, because of cholera and typhoid outbreaks. People were getting sick. They knew it was waterborne, trying to figure out what to do and how to do that. In the first several years, Arthur Palmer had collected over 2,000 water samples for community water supplies around the state. We've grown into an organization that we house the state's well logs. We do private well testing and community well testing. And we do a lot of work in support of the communities in Illinois and even around the country. Applied research, I've done a lot of research looking at arsenic, for instance, in groundwater, things like that. So it's really an organization that's part of the U of I now, but we're a quasi-state agency, if you will, and we provide a lot of support for folks in their water supplies. I mentioned we're 128 years old, so we've got this really great set of archives and glass plate slides that date back to 1900. I just like to show a few of those if you've been on these before. Somebody hand drew this, which as a civil engineer, when I look at this and think of the work it took to draw this by hand and have it this accurate and not make mistakes, I'd probably have to do this 4 or 5 times in order to make this graph, but this is the way it was done. These glass plates I mentioned, we investigated typhoid outbreaks. So in 2013, there was one in Rockford, which is a fairly large community in Illinois. It's probably 250,000 people or so. And one of the things they were investigating was whether it was the milk that was causing an outbreak. There's other cases where milk was the culprit, because back in those days, people got their milk from a milk supplier who basically had a large tank that everyone dipped a bucket into. And that's the way you got your milk. And there were 112 cases as of September 10th, according to this graph, and only 7 or 8 of those cases were actually part of this dairy route. And so, but it's interesting. And this glass plate happens to be broken. We found them in storage. Some of them are not in very good shape, but it's quite a historical record of the history of what's going on in Illinois. There's over 1,500 of these plates. And here, this is also from a glass plate. A water survey scientist is there. This is in the early 1920s, we think, taking a water sample from this hand pump in a park in a small town in Illinois. This is what a drill rig looked like in 1922. So today, if you've seen a modern drill rig or if you were around when they drilled your well, the world's changed quite a bit. So I guess that's been 101 years ago, quite a deal. So today, I'm actually giving the presentation, and Katie Buckley is our water resources specialist. She's taking your questions that you do put online. So I mentioned earlier, we're going to do questions at the end. If you have a question as we go through this material, put it in your question or chat box in your GoToWebinar window. Katie's tracking those. She's going to add them to a document that we can share online. And at the end, I'll pull that up. If I haven't answered your question already, there's a number of questions about certain things like testing. We'll go through a lot of that during the webinar today, so I won't answer those at the end. We also have Sally Dolan with us, who's an environmental health professional that just started with us in August. Not sure what, she's gonna have a lot to say today, but she's with us, and if there's anything that comes up, especially in her specialty, she will probably be speaking up at that time. So I forgot to put Sally on the participant list, sorry about that. Okay, so first thing we need to do is a poll question, and that's, one of the things, we're funded by US EPA, and which is why all of these classes and everything we do, we come out and give talks at events. People request us to even travel to other states, and we can do that all on our dime because we're funded. And one of the things that goes along with that is we need to prove to EPA that, one, we're reaching a wide group of folks and also folks from all over the country. And so the question today is really about your profession or if you're a well owner, and that helps us understand who our audience is. If you sign up for the class on our website, it asks you what state you're from. And we've had almost 12,000 people take the private well class. And so it's been pretty successful in that respect. So Katie is going to launch the poll.
Yep. So I have launched it. I just launched it while you were talking, just so folks can go ahead and start putting in their responses. We do realize that several attendees today might fit into more than one of the answer categories, and that's perfectly fine. Just pick the response that you are viewing today under. So we'll just give everybody a few seconds. We have 84% of the participants have responded. Let's give everyone 5 more seconds, and then I will go ahead and close the poll and share the answers.
And if you're here for CEs, we certainly expect everyone to participate in like this poll question. It's one way we know that you're paying attention. And so just mention that.
Absolutely. All right, so we have 89% have voted. I'm gonna go ahead and close the poll. And I'll quickly share the answers. It's pretty spread out today, which is, it's great to have a diverse audience between all 5 of these options here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and hide the responses, and then Steve, you can continue with the presentation.
All right, thank you. All right, so the things to remember as a private well owner are that they're not regulated. So community water supply is regulated by the Safe Drinking Water Act. Community has to have a licensed water operator who knows what he's doing and running a treatment plant and a distribution system and all those things, knows how to handle the chemicals they need to put into the water to make it safe, and all the different kinds of treatment. So as a well owner, you are the water operator of a very small water system, your own, which means you really need to understand how it works. You need to test regularly, just like communities do, so that if you do have something in your water, in Illinois, for instance, there's several aquifers where it's common to have arsenic higher than the health standard. And the Safe Drinking Water Act requires a community in Illinois or anywhere in the country to treat the water to remove that to a level below 10 parts per billion. That's considered the safe level. And so if you have it higher than that in your well water, you need to add treatment in order to ensure that it's safe, or you should. The other side of that is that as a private well owner, it's your choice. You want to drink water that's high in arsenic, more power to you. But the thing is, you're also sharing that with friends, family, your kids, maybe your parents, and it's just not a way to do things. So as a water operator, You need to understand your system, where your water is coming from, all those things. And so that's really one of the main points of our class, is to help you understand the basics of how your well and water system work, and the things you need to do to be a good steward of that, so that whenever you do have an issue or you have a concern, you can ask better questions, you understand better who the right people are to talk to, all that sort of stuff. The other thing is well water. My dad swore by our well water, even though it was from a 14-foot hand dug well and was probably always contaminated. But it can be the best tasting and safest in the world. But you also have things, again, I'll mention arsenic. I was an arsenic researcher for a number of years, so that's where I go. It's colorless, odorless, and doesn't have any taste if it's in water. So it can look like the clearest, finest water in the world and be harmful for you. Where a lot of times things that do cause discoloration, like tannins, can make the water turn kind of a faint yellow color, which doesn't look good because of what it represents, but it's harmless. And so the only way to know is to test. That's the bottom line. And so I now live in town, and I need to update this slide, I always forget, because it's never $40 or $50 anymore, because I have a 12-year-old daughter. But I pay $60 to $80 a month for my water, and that's the cost spread out over all the residents in Champaign, Urbana, and Savoy, for maintenance, making sure there's water pressure, that there's a line to my house, that the water's been tested and it's safe to drink, that if there's any treatment needed, that's all taken care of before it gets to my home. And that's your responsibility as a well owner. It's an important one. And a lot of people think, oh, it's just groundwater, it's safe. It may very well be safe, but you don't know if you don't test. So, and what we find is really it doesn't come down to, now PFAS is the hot button topic, and it was lead, and 6 years ago, still a problem, but I mean, that's when it was making its rounds in the news. But what it really comes down to is poor well construction and lack of knowledge from well owners. Folks who don't understand how to take care of their well or see it as a risk. And because every state regulates private wells a little differently, one thing they all do, even those with well construction code and have all these great rules now in place, they always grandfather in wells that are already there. So like the well I grew up on was hand dug by my grandpa in 1933. It's still a water supply for a family, and it really shouldn't be. And so those are really what we see most of the issues end up being, is poor well construction and folks just not understanding what they need to know to take care of their well. The things to consider: well depth, and I say deeper is generally better, only because the goal is to have your well protected at the surface so that you don't have any surface influences getting in your well water. Sometimes that can't be avoided, and sometimes a deeper well may have other problems, like a deep bedrock well in the Northeast may have uranium or arsenic at higher levels. And so that's just naturally occurring. That's the way the earth was formed. And those things are just there, and that's just bad luck. Location on the landscape. You don't want your well in the floodplain. You want it elevated such that it's in an area where it's not going to get overtopped by water. That's just one consideration. And understanding groundwater flow direction. The best example I can give here is if you're in a country or rural subdivision that's on a hill, and at the bottom of the hill is this pretty lake. The water table is likely flowing towards the lake, down gradient, as the land surface gets lower. If I'm the person at the very top of that hill and I have a shallow well and a septic system, that's great. But if I'm the last house at the bottom, everybody else's septic system is putting water into the ground, and some of that is getting into the water table. Some of it may get into an aquifer, and it's flowing towards the river or towards the lake. And so understanding how deep your well is, if you have a 250-foot sand and gravel well in that subdivision, and there's 100 feet of clay between the surface and the top of the aquifer, then it doesn't matter. You're not getting your water from near the surface. But if it's all shallow bored wells, then that's a concern. And so understanding that flow direction can matter depending on what type of well you have and all that sort of stuff. And just in general, the area surrounding your well, is there livestock? We've run into a lot of wells that are in a pasture where there's livestock. They've got posts set up to protect it, and the cattle use those as rubbing posts. I'll show you an example of that probably today. And so just being cognizant of, what's going on. You shouldn't have your dog chained to your well head. And people do those things just because you don't want to put things close to your well that could seep into the ground. And if your well isn't very deep, or if there happens to be some kind of connection, it's going to cause surface influences like that to contaminate it. I'm mentioning poor construction. Again, well codes today are great. We still have 2 states that don't have well code. That's one problem if you're in those states. The other is that older wells are grandfathered in. So we still see wells that are in pits. In the early 1960s, someone invented the pitless adapter, which allows you to have a submersible pump with a column pipe coming up that connects to this pitless unit, and then elbows towards your house at like 3 or 4 feet below land surface. And that's if you're in a cold climate, you don't have to worry about the frost line and your pipes freezing. Where in the older days before that, you had a pipe coming all the way to the surface, and then it went to your house, and those would freeze in the winter. And so people dug pits and had the top of their well 3 or 4 feet below land surface so that it came out of the top of the well and then elbowed to the house. Well, these pits are really dangerous. They can harbor water. If a big rainstorm comes along, it can flood your well. And we also see a lot of hand dug wells. And so those are the same issue. They're getting water from right near the surface. And so where they're at, what's nearby really matter, as well as being a safety hazard. So for example, the well on the upper left is the picture on the upper left is from the Washington State Department of Ecology. They're the state agency in Washington State that regulates wells and drillers. And so they have a blog. And this picture's old. It's probably 10 years old now. But on their blog, they had this picture. This is a little well house. This corrugated pipe is actually the well casing. There's the blue the blue jet pump there, or suction pump, and that piece of plywood. Obviously, the hole in the plywood that was cut out beforehand is for that cement block that's there. But she stepped on that, the woman who lives there, and it broke, and she fell in and it killed her. But if you look around, you see that little funnel there that may be for oil. All the gray stuff on the ground is probably from rotting insulation. All that stuff can get kicked around and fall in. It could be that the insulation's like that because of mice, which, stuff's falling in. There's just plywood protecting the top of that well. It's just really a poor way to have your water supply. The well on the upper right, that's a dead goat. Don Kelderman he's from Michigan. He was down in Southern Illinois the same time I was. He was investigating his family history and was looking for a country cemetery, and ran across this old farmstead that had this old well, and whoever owned it had put concrete tile, that's what you're seeing, the smooth concrete surface, down to about 3 feet, and below that is the old stone that made up the old dug well. And this well wasn't in use, but it wasn't covered, and the concrete only stuck up about 6 inches. And so when he looked in, that's what he found. And you'd be surprised how many animals, especially smaller animals, snakes, frogs, raccoons, all that stuff can fall in a well. They decompose there, and people are still drinking the water. And that is a fact, and it's unfortunate. The well on the bottom is the one I mentioned earlier, where the posts have been rubbed. That's a pasture. The well's down over the hill from the house because there's no water up by the house. And so this is close to a small stream where there's some sandy, thin lenses of sand in the ground, shallow geology, so they put their dug well there. This is covered with tin and 2x10s with concrete blocks, not well sealed. Snakes can get in there, rats, all that sort of stuff. And you can see on the lower right side how there's hoof prints there, and it's kind of muddy. Well, that's where the cattle come up and they rub, and then they do their business, and all that's seeping into the ground right at the well. So, just not an ideal way to have your water supply. And this is very common. It shouldn't be, but it really is. And it's just something to be aware of. If you have a well like this, it is not safe. The well I grew up on, I drank it my whole life. You get used to the bacteria that are typically in your well. If you have those problems, when I left for college, was gone for 3 months. After that, I could never drink our well water. It made me sick. And that's because I went to U of I and started drinking chlorinated water from our public water supply. And so I lost that bacteria in my stomach that I was used to. And so it's not about you necessarily. If I had $1 for every time somebody said I've been drinking this my whole life, it's never made me sick. Well, what about somebody who moves away or someone who comes to visit? I guarantee you some of those folks have gotten sick from drinking your well water if it's in one of these situations. So what should you do? Bring it up to code if you can. Talk to your state health department or agency that regulates well code, or even look it up online. Talk to a contractor. If it's a well in a pit, extend the pipe up to the surface and fill it in. And if you're in an area that's not a cold climate, then you probably don't have a well in a pit in the first place. But talk to the folks in your area, talk to several well contractors, as well as your county health department or local health district. Extension, there's extension in every state, I believe. Some of those folks, even if your local extension agent doesn't have all the answers for you, I guarantee you there's a few extension folks at their university in that state that do, or can get you the right answers and help you out. It's just a matter of being safe and also protecting your water quality. Same thing with abandoned wells. So, many times someone buys an old farmstead, they tear down the house, they put up a new one. There's an old well there that maybe in the front yard or somewhere else or right next to the house. And, they're worried about that. And when you hear all the stories about what can happen with a very shallow well and anything that might have spilled around it, you're going to drill a new well, which is probably the right thing to do. But instead of spilling that in and following the well code for sealing an abandoned well, they just leave it. Oh, I'm going to use it for my garden or whatever. So there are more wells out there that aren't documented, that people don't know where they're at anymore, than there are wells that we have on file. And we have almost 500,000 well logs in our files for about 800,000 wells we think that exist in Illinois. So they're like a well pit. They're really a safety hazard. If you own a property that has abandoned wells that aren't sealed, you need to properly abandon it. And there's a well code for that in most states, or you can use another state's code. Basically, you're filling it in and you're adding some clay or cement in seams so that nothing from the surface can go down through the inside of the well and get to an aquifer and contaminate it. But just like that dead goat, if someone falls in, gets hurt, or gets killed, whether they're trespassing or not, you're likely going to be liable. So, and if it contaminates an aquifer and there's other homes nearby, you could be liable for providing water to other people as well, if it could be proven. And so the best thing to do is just seal them. In some states, the soil and water conservation districts even have cost sharing plans where, let's say it's going to cost $800 or $1,000 to properly abandon a well, they'll pay for half of it, and it's money well spent. So as an example, here's two more pictures that both came from the Washington State Department of Ecology's blog. And the top one, they're trying to pull this horse out that fell in a well. And the bottom one, a guy was out in his backyard, didn't know there was an abandoned well. He fell through and fell in, and it was 45 feet. They pulled him out, he walked away. Yeah, the story's interesting. And how that happened, he's just very, very lucky, right? But we see old wells that there's just a concrete pad there, and they're like, oh, that concrete pad's been there forever. Well, what's underneath it? I'm not sure. All that stuff. These newspaper clippings are all from the 90s. Illinois, a long time ago, through our Department of Natural Resources, had a groundwater education coordinator And then eventually they cut that position because it was too useful, to be honest. He went around to schools, taught teachers things about what to teach in school, all that sort of stuff. I got these from him. 3 of them are newspaper articles from Illinois, and this is back in the 90s before everything was on the internet. And so likely when this happened, like in Galesburg, the people in Buffalo Grove and in Springfield, which are the 2nd and 4th articles, didn't know all this stuff happened. But anyone who's old enough remembers Jessica McClure. She was a 18-month-old girl in Texas who fell into a well, and she was stuck. It was only, I can't remember, I want to say it was like 12 or 14 inches maybe at most. It was covered live on CNN. It took them like 22 hours or something to get her out. It says here she was down at 22 feet, and eventually they did. She's alive today and a mother of 3, but it really had caught the attention of the nation because it was being carried live while they were trying to get her out, and it took so long. But these things shouldn't happen. People die. If you have an abandoned well that's not sealed, you should certainly get it filled in. So a few things about basic well care. First thing I'll say is, if you're not a well person, you should have someone who do the work for you. I get it. My dad, I grew up on a farm. We did a lot of things ourselves. I learned how to weld and do all those things at an early age. But when it comes to your well and your drinking water, Illinois allows you to drill your own well on your own property. I don't know why anyone who doesn't have experience doing that would want to. And so, the best advice I give you, if you need a new pump or whatever, have someone come and do it that knows what they're doing. And so, saying that, every state also has rules, right? They've legislated well code, and drilling contractors have to have licenses and maintain those, just like environmental health professionals do in almost every state. And so there are rules on type of casing that you have to grout around the outside of the borehole, what kind of screen you can use if it's a sand and gravel well, all those things. When you're having, you should know what kind of well you have, how deep it is, how it was constructed. Now today, again, every state but 2 requires well logs to be filed. And so you can get that information, but a lot of older wells, there just isn't data out there for it, and that's unfortunate. But you can look all this stuff up. If you're going to drill a well, make sure that your well driller is licensed in your state. There's just, do your due diligence, ask for references, make sure they're bonded. There's in our private well class itself, we go through a list of things if you're going to hire a contractor to drill a well that you should ask. And one, for instance, is to make sure the contract says that you get a copy of the log and all the materials, the geology and everything else that they've gone through, all the information about the pump, because they don't necessarily have to give that to you. And we've had people who have contacted us saying, I need my well log, and only the driller has it, and he's refused to give that data away. So anyway, yeah. As far as this, I use this picture because it was such a nice, clean looking well with a nice gap, and that smaller tube is for the electric lines. But you should look around your wellhead, and one, it should be up above the ground so that there's no flood risk. The only thing about this picture that isn't great is we tell people they should probably mound the dirt a little bit up against the well so that when it rains, water is running away. So the grass right at the wellhead and around it should be a little higher than the surrounding area, because you don't water the pond around your well, even though in theory it's grouted around the outside. You don't want to give it the opportunity to water to sit there and maybe eventually work its way in. So it should be on level ground. It should be accessible. And when you use PVC, it's fine to use that, but you shouldn't have anything near it. We had a family in Virginia that contacted us about, or actually contacted RCAP, and we got involved. They had a well just like this, and they were getting bacteria hits. and they shot chlorinated their well several times, and they couldn't get rid of it. They couldn't figure out why. So I eventually said, just send me a picture. And instead of being, they said, well, it's by itself out in the front yard, you know. But when they sent me the picture, about 2 feet away from this well was a very large tree that probably was 24-inch or larger diameter. And so I told them what I believed has happened is as that tree grew, when it gets over to the well casing, the area that's disturbed around the annulus where the borehole was is much easier for the roots to get through. So it's snaked its way around that well. And then as the roots grow and the tree gets bigger, it's squeezing the casing and cracked it. So probably somewhere between 2 and 10 feet below land surface, this well has a crack in it. And that's why they're getting bacteria problems. And so, having a tree right next to your well is a very bad idea. If it were a steel case well, that wouldn't happen in all likelihood. But with PVC, sometimes you see that stuff. Yes, and there should be nothing but grass around it. It needs to be open. We've run into wells that are under a garage or in a basement, one even in a kitchen, and there's no way to work on that well for a contractor if there's a problem. And especially, if it's got an old submersible in it. And there's a case where someone had a well next to their house. They built an addition and just built it over the well, not understanding that means there's no way to pull the pump. So people do things that they just aren't thinking is the bottom line. This figure is from the Minnesota Department of Health. Most states also have restrictions on where you can put a well. And so there's a long list of things that there's a setback distance from, especially like your septic or from a livestock. And this says animal feedlot between 1 and 300 animal units is 50 feet. They're pretty minimum regulations. I don't want my well 50 feet from a feedlot, even, especially if it's a shallow well. But anyway, by law, these are the rules they have to follow when they put in a well. In Minnesota, and there's a long list of things, and that's why I show this one, because there's things you might not think about. Electric lines. Why do you want to be 10 feet from an electric line? Well, if you ever have to get into the well and it's got a submersible, you have to set a rig or a contracting truck over the well to pull the pump, and the sections of pipe, you can't be in an electric line or near a gas thing, all those sorts of things. And so it's something to keep in mind if you're going to install a well. A lot of times you're installing the well in a location where you're going to get water. If there's that question, maybe it's down near a stream because there's up on the bluff, like the one house I mentioned, there just isn't any water there. And it may dictate some of those things. But if you're over a major aquifer, like, then it isn't a matter of where you put the well, you're going to hit an aquifer. It's a matter of how that fits for the lines going in your home, what's nearby, all that sort of stuff. And as far as your septic system, there's a lot of work being done now and a lot more advances. In the old days, everyone had a regular septic system, which was a tank that came from your house, that settled out the solids, and then that material was digested by all the bugs the bacteria that are in our septic tanks, which are based on the bacteria in our stomachs. And then the clear water, or once there's no solids, that ends up going into a drain field, or soil absorption field as it's called here. And then it percolates down into the ground through a gravel layer that you've installed, where microbes in the soil can break that on down, and it's harmless. And it's a natural system. It works great. And these days we run into things because of people want to be by lakes, or they want to be in areas where it's bedrock at the surface. It's also serving as a water supply. So now we have a lot more advanced systems. We're not going to cover any of that today, but we are getting involved in it. And this is just a basic tank, but it's important from the private well side, because if this is mismanaged, then it can get plugged, and then things come out of the top, and you have effluent from your home that can get into the shallow water table near your house that hasn't been broken down. And so it can become a water quality problem. And so it's important also to take care of your septic tank and your drain field. And as far as a to-do list for that, you make sure you maintain the area around your tank and drain field. You should know where your inspection port is and the manhole for it. You should have someone inspect it fairly regularly, so you can understand how much solids in it. You know, people tell me, you know, we use all these additives in our well and or in our septic, and we haven't had to pump our tank in 20 years. Well, if your system's working properly, one, you don't need any additives. They don't necessarily do any good. And if you don't pump your tank, eventually it's going to fill up. And when it does, it could back up into your home. It could plug the drain field, so you have to put in a whole new one. All those sorts of things can go wrong. So it's important to maintain that. You shouldn't have any trees. Trees, you know, roots love water. They find their way into the drain field. That's why you have companies that specialize in clearing out septic and sewer lines, because trees and those roots find their way through any crack and crevice. So your drain field especially should only be grass. You shouldn't drive heavy equipment off it, over it. No trees, all that sort of stuff. And it isn't, so I said here that reduce the flow of water into your septic system. You know, the bacteria in that tank need time to break things down. And this doesn't mean you have to be ultra conservative with the water you use in your house, but you shouldn't have your sump run into it, or whirlpool, or a softener backwash, because those can overload, and then the things are just going to move through the system without being broken down. You should only put what you need to in your system, as far as no man-made stuff, paints, pills, anything like that. You don't pour stuff down your toilet or your sink that are, you know, especially pills. You got leftover antibiotics from when your kid is sick. You dump those down the drain. You're putting antibiotics in a tank that has bacteria in it that are breaking down your effluent from your home. It's not the right thing to do, basically. And garbage disposals, if you have a septic tank, you really should not have a garbage disposal, because the solids, like, you know, when you've cut up vegetables or whatever and put that in there, it doesn't chop them up so much that they're in too much of their original form, if you will, for bacteria to really break them down in any timely manner. And so they end up on the bottom of your tank and fill up your solids a lot quicker. I believe NESE, the National Environmental Services Center, recommends that if you have a garbage disposal, you should at least have the time that you would normally pump your tank. So if, you know, a lot of those are based on number of bedrooms or the number of people in a home and the size of the tank. So if you have a 1,000-gallon tank, and based on the size of the home, they recommend that you pump your tank every 3 years. You're looking at, if you're going to use a garbage disposal, every year to year and a half, because otherwise your tank's going to fill up too fast. So yeah, enough about that. If you want to learn more about your septic system and your on-site wastewater treatment system, which is where we're headed for describing those things, because many of them aren't just septic tanks anymore, the EPA has a great website. It's epa.gov/septic. This is an older slide, obviously. Save the date says 2021, but it still serves the right purpose. The rest of these slides are actually newer, but there's a ton of information about how to understand how to take care of your tank, things you should do, and what you need to know. And so I'm not going to go through these in any detail, but the outline, if you will, or the headings on the left side give you a lot of information about your tank, how they work, if you don't understand those things, and even resources for folks like us, an outreach toolkit, just things to provide you an understanding of how they can impact things. So this is about how a septic tank can impact your drinking water. Remember, I mentioned groundwater flow. Well, in this image, even though the well's on the opposite side of the house from the drain field, because the water table and the aquifer are shallow, and the soil here, like where the 3 and the 4 are, I would say the soil must be pretty permeable. for that material to get down to the water table quickly, but then the natural flow direction is from left to right, and it's headed right towards your well. And so even though the setback distance, like I think in Illinois, it's 75 feet, in some states it's 100, it may be well beyond that, but depending on all those factors, if you're in the wrong, like we have some areas, some counties that are along major rivers, like along the Mississippi, where half the county is down in the floodplain. It's all sandy soil, even at the surface. Those areas are at risk if, in that case, you'd want your septic system on the river side of your home and your well on the opposite side of your home, because most shallow flow is towards the river. And just sensible things like that. As far as advanced systems, we have systems today that remove nitrates or BOD, or actually are chlorinated, so the water is, quote, safer to be discharged, all those sorts of things. They have an ongoing list of what each state approves. States are getting more involved in maintaining those. In Illinois, it's at the county level. And they have really practical rules related to that. And again, it's to protect not only our aquifers, but also our rivers and streams. I know as a kid, canoeing, I grew up near a fairly large creek. We used to canoe it and tube it and fish a lot there. You'd see some homes that were fairly close that had straight pipes going right to coming out of the side of the bank of the river. And they were just discharging directly. None of those are illegal, and but we still see them sometimes, and it's just not the way to handle things. Any of the webcasts they've had, or webinars they've done in the past, there's an ongoing list. This list goes on much further than what I've shown here on different things related to on-site or septic systems. So moving on to testing, we recommend you test your well annually, or anytime the well's been opened, or anytime that you notice any change in taste, odor, color. And the annually part is for coliform nitrate. I think I'll get into that here in a second. And what do you test for? It really depends on a lot of things. You need to be inquisitive. So if you're in on a major aquifer somewhere, or in a bedrock aquifer, talk to your state Department of Ecology. Well, depends on every state who they are. In Illinois, it would be the Water Survey or Geological Survey. In Wisconsin, it'd be DNR. In Minnesota, it's Department of Health, or in New York, it's Department of Health. Whoever deals with water quality issues. So most states have folks in some department that have mapped the water quality of their state based on the aquifer, and know what contaminants are there. I can tell you where there's arsenic in which aquifers in Illinois. We don't have it all over the state, but we certainly have it fairly high in a few areas and a few counties. And so we make people aware of that. All you have to do is ask your county or state health department. They can get you to the right people. If it's not them, and make sure that you sample for things that might not be the most common. I wouldn't recommend everyone sample for every contaminant that's listed in the Safe Drinking Water Act, because they're not that prevalent. But they have an MCL, which stands for maximum contaminant level, that every water supply in the country has to stay below, because above that they have health effects. And so a lot of those things you may not have in your water, but you need to identify where those things might be. And I'll show you an example in a second. I do want to mention coliform nitrate. We recommend you test for that annually, because it's testing for coliform nitrate doesn't mean that's all you need to do, and it doesn't mean you're well safe. It could still have arsenic in it, or uranium, or some other constituent. But you test for coliform and nitrate because they're so ubiquitous in the surface environment. They're so common everywhere that if you have bacteria in your well, or if you have elevated nitrate in your well, it means that there's likely a pathway from the surface into your well water. And that's what you need to figure out. And so sampling just for those two things annually is a way for you to verify, if you will, that the integrity of your well is still in place. Even something as simple as your wells in the middle of your yard is PVC. You have a teenage kid who's one of your children is mowing your yard for you. They may hit it with a riding lawnmower and you may not say anything. And if you've got a crack just below the surface, bacteria are going to find their way in there. And so you need to be sure. And it's a simple way to do that is to test annually. Some examples of how to find out other information. If you're in Massachusetts, they've done enough sampling there and around the state where they've developed this website where you can just put in your address. And if you have a bedrock well, they'll tell you whether there's a risk of arsenic or uranium. And so you need to test for that. Whereas if they know that which aquifers have that naturally occurring, if you are not in one of those areas, then you don't need to do that. So it's kind of nice that that's one of the bigger problems in their state, and so they're dealing with it through Mass DEP. This is Rhode Island. The whole state is 30 miles wide and 40 miles tall. And this is on the Department of Health's website. All the little circles are where there used to be orchards. And until the 60s, they used arsenic-based pesticides. And now all of those areas have definitely soil contamination from arsenic, but also some of the shallow aquifers also have contamination. And so they've mapped all that to say, if you're near an old apple or near an old orchard, you definitely want to consider a shallow well. You want to test for arsenic. And that big splotch in the middle, that's about a third of the state, that's where they know there's natural occurring beryllium. And this figure is the poster child for why you need to ask. I'd never heard of beryllium being a regulated contaminant. I've never heard of it in groundwater in my work in Illinois. And I found this, probably 8 or 10 years ago on Rhode Island's webpage. But it does. It has an MCL through the Safe Drinking Water Act. It has health effects if you drink water with too high levels of beryllium. And so they've identified that for Rhode Island, that if you're in one of these areas or in this area, you want to test for beryllium and make sure that it's not too high. And so that's when I say you need to be inquisitive and ask. The folks in the county, the state, all want to help you, protect you and your family. That's their job. And so most of the time they'll bend over backwards to try to help you understand what your risks are and what you might need to do. And so we certainly recommend you take advantage of that. And these days, now this is Wisconsin, excuse me, they've developed a website where actually, I should say they had the University of Stevens Point develop a website using all their private well data and water quality. So this is an ArcGIS tool, and this is an older slide. It's more advanced today. But up in the upper right, I clicked on display arsenic by county. So it's showing me where they have data, the counties that are clear. You see the roads underneath. They didn't have any data at the time. But you're seeing where there's arsenic problems and what levels they might be at. So the health standard for a public water supply is 10 ppb. So anything yellow, orange, or red is over that. And the 3 counties close to Green Bay, they're all over 21 or higher. And so if I'm going to move up there or I'm going to buy a house on a well, I'm certainly going to ask and try to find out if there's an arsenic issue. Probably depends on the aquifer, but the state has that data. They've decided to make it public on a county or township scale, and so it's a great tool for anyone in Wisconsin or moving to Wisconsin to understand what constituents there might be in the groundwater and what things they might need to worry about. So, one county on Lake Superior there up by Duluth, none detected in the samples that they've gotten up there. So, and again, arsenic's a natural occurring contaminant. This isn't because of a spill or any of those things. It's typically because it's just there in the ground. It's a fairly common constituent of the Earth's crust. So what we suggest, and again, remember, we're suggesting a list of things based on a national audience where we know the geology is different in different parts of the country. And so there's other things like beryllium that you might need to test for depending on where you live. Again, coliform nitrate annually, because it's a way to ensure that you can look at the integrity of your well and feel comfortable that surface influence isn't affecting your well water quality. And then a whole set of inorganics and metals every 3 to 5 years. You know, the example I'll give is back in the 90s, we installed a number of monitoring wells around the state. And I was in charge of a project over one of our major aquifers, the Muhammad Aquifer, and it's known to have arsenic. So we have about 30 wells over maybe a 900 square mile area. And most of those wells have between 10 and 100 parts per billion of arsenic. We have one well that always tests less than 3 parts per billion, which you know, is pretty low, and it's great, right? We've sampled that at least 3 times over the last 20 to 30 years, and it's always the same. It's always near 3. Where the other wells that are, you know, there's one that's around 54 or something like that. It's always, you know, 52 to 56. I mean, it's a deep sand and gravel aquifer. It's protected by over 100 feet of glacial material above it that helps limit water movement through it. And so we don't expect the water quality to change. And so another reason why you test for all these other things is if you have a big change in your water quality, then there's got to be a reason why. You know, if all of a sudden your pH has changed, you need to figure out why that happened, because it shouldn't have. Or all of a sudden you're seeing a lot of copper. That could be that you had copper pipes, and initially it wasn't leaching any copper or lead, but something changed with your water chemistry so that it's leaching more, became more corrosive or aggressive. And so understanding those things. So it could even be something as simple as you have a treatment device and it's not working properly, so it's changing the water that's going through some of those pipes. But if it changes, you know, after from 5 years or the last 2 times you sampled, it gives you something to share with others, or a treatment person, or your extension person, or whoever, your county health department, so that they can look at that and try to figure out what's going on. As far as where to get your water tested or analyzed, every state accredits labs for doing compliant sampling, is what it's termed. And those are the samples that every community water supply has to collect on a 3-month basis. And so every state lists those on their website. So you can go to your state agency, like again, in New York, that'd be the Department of Health. In Illinois, that'd be IEPA. But they have a list of approved labs that are accredited to do drinking water analysis. We recommend you use an accredited lab. There are some university labs that follow all the procedures, but they don't keep their certification because it's kind of expensive to do. And a lot of times they're doing this as a service to the folks in their state. So 2 examples I'll mention are Texas A&M, and another is Virginia Tech. So Virginia Extension is at Virginia Tech. They have a great program and help and test a lot of wells in their state for homeowners. And so I would have no qualms using their lab, even though they're not accredited for compliant sampling. But you know, our general advice to you as a well owner is that you should use an accredited lab, because they've had to go through a number of hoops to prove that they're good at what they do. They can actually analyze and find the things that they're supposed to at the right levels using the right techniques and all that. The other thing about labs is you want a lab that's going to give you good instructions, that you can talk to someone and they can help you understand what you need to do, why it's important to have, you know, your bacteria sample has to be there within 28 hours, whatever it might be. And they should be able to answer your questions till you're satisfied. And if they can't, or they don't have that information available on their website, then I'd find another lab. And and I've actually said that to a number of labs, that if you don't have someone who can talk to well owners, you know, you're not going to get that kind of business, because, you know, they have a lot of questions. So, and a good lab's going to provide all the bottles and everything else you need, instructions. You know, a lot of them these days, you can call them, they'll send you a kit with a prepaid label you just ship it back, you follow the instructions. Yeah, and so it's becoming more available than it was, say, 10 years ago for folks to get that kind of work done. As far as interpreting results, there are some places on the web. Some of the state extension offices have a thing where you can type in values and it gives you results and tells you what they mean. But regardless of what you find on the web, I would always recommend you take your sample results to your local health department to get an answer from them. Hey, what's this mean? And if they, don't have someone with enough experience to really give you a great answer, they should be able to go to their state health department, to a state toxicologist or somebody like that, and get the information you need. We generally, as a general rule, would say if you find something, especially if it's odd, no one else has this around you, or it's at a level that's way extreme compared to anything they've seen, maybe resample to confirm. Folks make mistakes. A lot of sample analysis work requires dilution and separating samples and things like that. Someone made a mistake in calculating some of those things. You could have a value that's 100 times what it really is. Yeah, and as far as bacteria, usually people test for coliform. And if you find coliform, then you should have an E. coli test done. And that's the type of coliform that the general class of coliform bacteria, E. coli is the one that actually causes health problems. And once you've found even coliform bacteria in your well, the general coliform bacteria, you should boil your water before you use it for drinking or cooking, and you should shock chlorinate your well, which we're going to talk about in the questions, because honestly, a lot of people asked about chlorine this month, which is really interesting and good. There is a tool we would recommend. So the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services got funding from CDC to build a tool on how to look at your sample results. So this is a state agency, which gives it credibility, and it was built for the citizens of New Hampshire, but anyone can use it. There's a place on here where it asks you what city you're from, and that's really for them. In the Northeast, if you're not from that area, there are many, many towns that don't have public water systems. Everyone's on a well, much more so than in the Midwest anyway. And so there's a ton of private wells in those areas, and they're in close proximity. And so it really helps the state and others understand what's going on, especially because there's a lot of arsenic, there's a lot of bedrock, so there's other things like uranium. It helps them to understand what's going on in their state if they know where these samples are coming from. And that's all they ask is what city. But if you click on the green bar at the bottom that says enter your well test results, you get to this page and you can type in values. And the cool thing is, and why this is better than some of the other ones that are out there, is because it also allows you to pick the units. Many times a lab gives you everything in milligrams per liter, or the sites may say you need to put this in milligrams per liter, and that's the only option you have, even though your results are in micrograms per liter, or maybe they're listed as ppb. If you don't know how to convert that, then that's a problem. You might put in the wrong number, or you may not even pay attention and just put the number that was on your result sheet, and it may be the wrong units, which makes it 1,000 times higher than it really is. If you put 15 milligrams per liter, that's a lot. It's a lot more. It's 1,000 times what it really is, because it's 15 micrograms per liter. When you take the private well class, before you get the first lesson, you get a link to a quiz, and I think it's only maybe 8 or 9 questions. And one of the questions it's multiple choice. It gives you the results of a sample in one unit and asks you to convert to the other. And you've got 3 choices or 4 choices to pick the right answer. Only for the first 3,000 or 4,000 people that took our class, only 27% got that question right. And so it's a big deal in that respect, that having to mess with the units can really throw people off. Anyway, so for this webinar, I stuck 15 micrograms per liter, which the standard is 10, because micrograms per liter is the same as ppb. And so then I hit submit, and I got a red X. The actual health standard is written in the law as 0.01 milligrams per liter, but this is 0.015 milligrams per liter, and so it exceeds the drinking water standard. What's nice, the other thing that's really nice about this is they've built into this the type of treatment you need. And when we get to the questions today, there's at least 2 cases where someone has all this treatment and they don't mention why they needed all this treatment. And then so I want to make a point of that. But if someone is trying to sell you treatment equipment, you need to make sure you need it. And the only way to know that is by testing for the constituents it's supposed to remove. So for arsenic, there's 2 types of, there's absorptive media and there's RO, reverse osmosis, that are commonly used to remove arsenic. Sometimes you have to put, with an RO unit, you have to put an oxidizing filter or something in front of it to convert the arsenic. There's 2 forms, +3 and +5. That's kind of getting in the weeds, but a treatment specialist should be able to give you that information. So there's no other thing to use really that would be commonly used in a home treatment system. If you follow down the page, you know, it tells you about ANSI, NSF ANSI Standard 53 is for absorptive media, and NSF ANSI Standard 58 is for RO. Those things are really important. NSF, the National Sanitation Foundation, and ANSI, which is, I don't know, it's a quasi-government agency that they run standards and say that if you're going to develop a treatment system for RO, it has to meet these criteria to get a seal of approval from us that says this really works at removing this constituent. So when you go to buy treatment equipment, you should only buy treatment equipment that has an NSF seal and the National Sanitation Foundation, a gold seal from the Water Quality Association, which is also a third-party certifier, which is what these are, or a UL symbol for Underwriters Lab. Now, you've all seen that or used to on light bulbs. That means that Underwriters Lab, for instance, has tested that equipment and it meets the standards for this NSF ANSI standard, whatever it might be. And so if you buy treatment equipment that doesn't have one of those symbols, then it means they haven't taken it to a third-party certifier, and you have no guarantee that it's actually going to remove what it's supposed to. And when you look at a website that has, you know, they may have 50 kinds of RO units, you know, it's a supplier, and they have 50 different RO systems. If you sort them by cost, all the ones at the bottom that are only $100 or $150 or $200 aren't going to be certified. And the ones near the top, which, you know, there's an extreme there too, but, you know, probably $500 or $600 at least for an RO unit that's going to have been certified and will remove arsenic. So that's buyer beware. That's the best thing I can tell you in that respect. And again, I just want to reiterate, even though there is a really nice tool out there, drinking water can be really different, or it can have odd constituents in it that may mask certain things. And so in the end, you should always take your sample results to a qualified health professional. And that's what they're there for. And if you don't want to go to your health department, go to your doctor. And they may not be able to, they may not understand it either. A lot of times, doctors aren't experts in drinking water quality. They may have to find someone, but it's important that you do those things. And I mentioned this at the bottom, they can't tell you to stop drinking your water or condemn your well. They can only recommend it. There are some local jurisdictions, and I use an example of a health district in Connecticut, where they've created their own rules so that they actually do have the authority to condemn a well. And so what I tell well owners, to be fair, is if you're concerned about that, and, you know, because it really is your decision if you want to drink that water, it always, you know, at least in the rest of the country, call them first, ask them what kind of rules they have, what authority do they have. If I bring in my analysis, can you tell me I can't drink my water? Because in 99% of the country, they can only recommend it. And, if you're in a remote area or you don't have the means to put in a new water supply, we certainly aren't recommended that anyone drink water that's contaminated. But also, most people are well owners because they want to be, and you should have some say on what happens there, because you can always go to someone else. The rules in many of the Northeast states vary from district to district. You may have one district that's like the one I mentioned. They actually do have authority. They've given themselves the authority to condemn a well. The district right next to them may not have any rules related to private wells. So someone there might be able to help you. And, that's the advice I would give. As far as treatment, there's several reasons. Obviously, the primary drinking water contaminants in the Water Use Act, the ones that have MCLs, are because of health. They cause health issues. But there's also secondary contaminants that cause cosmetic issues. So that could be this iron that's staining your porcelain, or they have a smell or a taste or have a color. Like I mentioned, tannins. You can't assume you need a test, and you shouldn't buy treatment equipment because someone says, oh, you really need to treat it. It's groundwater. Well, water's not any good. That's ridiculous. A lot of times, well water's perfectly safe, but you don't know if you don't test, and you don't know what kind of treatment you need until you have tested and you see what your water quality is. There's a gentleman up on the north side of Chicago. I was doing a well assessment at his house, and he said, oh, my treatment equipment's in the basement. And he had everything under the sun, and he had means, but I bet he had $8,000 or $10,000 of treatment equipment in his basement. And I asked him what was in his water that was so bad, and he hadn't even tested, had no idea, and just, this is what I'm going to do. To me, that's a big waste of money. So the other thing I want to mention is rarely, if ever, will you need a whole house purification system. So the example I'll use again is arsenic. I know in the Northeast, there's at least 1 or 2 vendors up there that recommend whole house arsenic removal for their clients. The difference is between $500 and up to $10,000 if you're treating every drop of water that comes into your home. Arsenic is not a dermal risk. It's not an inhalation risk. It's a drinking water risk. It's drinking water that has arsenic in it. You only need to treat the water you're drinking and cooking with. And so if someone tries to sell you that equipment, be wary, because there are cases where there's certain constituents in water where it may need a house purification system, but that's not very common. And so, you need to understand that, or find somebody to ask. The Water Quality Association has a program for treatment professionals that involves them agreeing to an ethics code and some of those things. And I would consider, if I was going to use a treatment vendor, that they have that certification from WQA. It's not a lot of proof, if you will. People are people, and there's bad apples in every profession, but it gives you some assurance that they've at least seen what the rules are and why it's important to be reputable and all those things, and decent people are going to do the right thing. So it's a big industry, is all I can say. I guess I got ahead of myself. So so there are common examples of whole house treatment, like an iron filter, because it stains all your sinks and all that sort of stuff, or a softener so your water isn't hard. But those are pretty common, and they're not real health issues. But like an RO unit, if you put a whole house RO in, it wastes at least 5 gallons of water for every a gallon of water it treats. You have to do something with that spent water. And, and you don't have to believe me. Because I am not a health professional in training, I contacted the Minnesota Department of Health and asked them their take on that. And they said, this is what they told me. It doesn't, even up at levels of, I asked them what about 250 parts per billion? that's what I've seen in Illinois. They're like, at that level, it's still not a problem except for drinking. So I just want to make sure everybody's aware of that, because it's a frustrating thing to see that folks have spent all that money on something they don't need because someone didn't do right by them. As far as treatment maintenance, that's the other big issue. So if you have treatment, even if it's a filter, if you don't maintain it and you don't swap out the filter or do any back flushing that needs to be done, or back flusher, softener, whatever it might be, it can really become a problem. A filter can harbor bacteria, so if it just sits and gets used and used, eventually water is going to bypass it. It's not going to filter anything anyway, and then you're going to have bacteria growth that could eventually cause someone to get sick because it becomes a source, so to speak. And so when I first started the private well class back in 2013, one of the first webinars I did, we had 8 staff from the Minnesota Department of Health who participated as watched it, just so they could critique it. And one gentleman who was a regional, worked in one of the regional offices, suggested that we don't teach anyone about treatment. We don't mention it, we don't highlight it, we don't say a lot about it, because in his experience working with homeowners in northern Michigan or Minnesota, more people don't take care of those devices and they become a source of contamination rather than a way to remove contamination. And he was so frustrated that he suggested we don't want to teach people about treatment. I disagree. I think we need to give everyone all the information they can have, and if they don't follow it, that's on them. But that's a true story. So, okay, a little bit about the private well class. If you're not familiar, this is our webpage. It's privatewellclass.org. You go to this page, you can click on take our free class. It takes you to a page where you put in your email address, your first name, and this is a drop down as the state you live in. And so the class instruction emails are every 7 days, as I mentioned. When you enroll, you'll get an email from us asking you to take a quiz. It's on a website, and then the lesson comes along too, I think. And then if you signed up at 3 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon, every 3 o'clock on every Tuesday for the next 10 weeks, you're going to get an email from us with a new lesson. It's a PDF. You're on your own to read it. It's material you can hold on to. We certainly recommend you do. We've got additional resources on our webpage for each of the lessons. And if you ever have questions, you obviously can email us at info@privatewellclass.org. I mentioned we have additional information. So the first lesson is called The Science of Groundwater. All these bulleted things at the top there are other organizations or agencies that have material that we cover in that first lesson. So, Lyle Raymond from Cornell University, he developed these 2 documents back in '88 and 1992. Very well done, very easy to understand his explanations. I used a couple figures from his documents actually in the lesson. But if these lessons were written to be conversational, like someone's talking to a well owner, and if that doesn't resonate with you as a reader, then maybe one of these other resources will. And regardless, they have a lot of additional information that we may not have covered in our private well class lesson, just because each of these lessons is 6 to 10 pages long, and it's meant to give you, like I said, it's a 101 type of class. The second lesson is groundwater and well contamination, and it goes on from there. Lesson 10 is about treatment. And so that's how you get through those. If you've been to this page before, or maybe you found out about our webinar from an email, but on our webinars page, we list all the webinars. I just use the same slide from a past webinar here, but you can see we do them every month. Some of them are directed at specific groups, like the one at the bottom. We did one in September for real estate professionals. And every July, we do a complete webinar just on septic systems. And we bring in an expert. He's an RCAP person who was a sanitarian for 8 years and did septic inspections. He's usually our answer person for that, answers your questions, because I am not a septic expert. I just know enough to be dangerous. So, but you can see all our webinars there. And if further down the page, I'm not sure I have that here, I don't, but further down that page is a list of our past webinars, and there's links to these recordings. So like in 2018, we did a webinar on lead. We brought in an expert from Virginia Tech who's done a lot of work with private wells that have lead pipes in their homes. And, you know, it's a risk for everybody that has lead or copper pipes or lead solder, depending on the type of water you have. And so it's a really useful webinar. We haven't repeated it because everything's covered in this webinar and nothing's really changed. We know what the issues are with lead. It's a matter of, you know, the real problems are that there's so much of it out there that there's no way to get rid of all the lead pipes in the country. You know, for a homeowner to replace the lead pipes in their home, which would be their responsibility, you're looking at between 10 and 20,000 or more. And so it's just not going to happen. And so that's why, you know, you need to understand if you're at risk, and if you are, what you can do. You know, you can make the water less aggressive and then it won't leach out of the pipes. So there are solutions. And there's some communities that have lead pipes all over the place and they have no lead problems in their water because their water chemistry is such that it doesn't leach the lead off the pipes. And it's just a matter of, you need to understand what situation you might be in yourself. We've had specialty webinars like this one. We did this in February on financing options. The bottom line is, nationally, there's really very few options, and most of those are for low-income folks. In the Farm Bill, the USDA was given a lot of funds to dole out related to wells and septic, but it's only for people whose household income is 60% or below the poverty level in their state. And so that's really low. And so it's certainly meant to help those who need it the most, but for most well owners, it's probably not going to be an option. Some states have programs or grants or different options, or in this webinar, we also cover things like if you want to abandon your well, there's some options, or if you want to test, you know, Iowa has a Grants to Counties program. Their state legislature gives their counties health departments money to help cost share or pay for water sample analysis or for abandoning wells. Great program. I wish my state had it, or in every other state had it, but it's only in Iowa. And so if you live there, you have that support, and you should talk to your county health department. But so we cover a lot of those things in this webinar, and it's certainly worth taking a look at it, give you an idea of where you might look in your area to see if there's something available. We also have a series of training videos. You know, what is a bedrock well? What do you do after a fire or a flood? What you should know about a shared well. There's a lot more folks who share a private well than we realized, or I ever realized, all over the country. And, you know, there's things that go along with that. If you don't have a written agreement, the person who owns the well, it's on their property, probably has all the say. And they sell their home to somebody who's not so friendly, all of a sudden you might find that you have to drill your own well, or that you don't have a water supply. And so understanding those things is important. We have two webinars on septic tanks. One is why does my well, or septic tanks, pressure tanks. Why does my well keep losing pressure, and how does my pressure tank work? How does my pressure tank work has had close to 450,000 views since 2016. That tells us two things. One, that there's not a lot of information out there about that, and that a lot of private homeowners or private well owners that have a septic or a pressure tank, don't understand how to fix that or make so that they have a higher pressure. Things are changing. You don't see these large pressure tanks in new homes. Instead, you have a 1 or 2 gallon pressure tank that's meant to help start your system, but instead you have a variable speed drive on your pump. And so the pump actually pumps as hard as it needs to keep the pressure at a certain level when water's being used. Those are more efficient. They do a better job of maintaining water pressure. And so, yeah, they finding a new way. It's just, that's just really become prevalent in the last 6 to 10 years. We have a podcast called the Drinking Water in Rural America podcast. The URL is drinkingwaterpodcast.org, which I should have put on this page. But we talk to experts about things related to both private wells and small rural community water supplies. I put 4 folks on here that are all talking about private wells. Brian Swistock was the head of the Penn State well owner extension program. They have a master well owner network. They've done a lot of really cool things. Pennsylvania is one of 2 states that doesn't regulate drillers or have a well construction code. And because of that, there's a huge grassroots effort in the state by a lot of groups, including folks like, I can't think of it now. It's a political group, but that they give out money to do sampling and testing. And Brian's recently retired, but he is probably the most knowledgeable man I've ever worked with on private wells. So it was quite a loss for our industry whenever he stepped away. Alan Wolf is the head of pediatrics at Boston Children's Hospital and also Harvard Medical School. He deals with children's cases that are unique, and sometimes more than not, they end up being related to their drinking water. And so it was a really interesting conversation. He's got a real passion for helping children and dealing with water well issues. Eric is with the Water Quality Association, which I mentioned something about them before, and Dr. Gibson, Jackie, is at North Carolina State. She's the head of their civil engineering department. She's done a lot of work with environmental justice issues related to private wells and folks not being served. And again, really interesting talk of some of the work she's done in the past. So if you're interested in those things, it's drinkingwaterpodcast.org. There's been 36 episodes already. It's actually been kind of fun for us to do. So the bottom line is that we're related to our class. It's really about understanding your well and where your water's coming from. So you need to know the depth. And you can find out the geology at that depth, if you have a screen or not. It's sand and gravel versus bedrock well. How deep is your pump set? What's your well casing? Is it? I mean, if you have an old brick lined well, that tells a lot about where your water quality is going to be. And know if there are any natural occurring contaminants like beryllium that might be in your area. So you got to ask questions. And if you go through our class, my take on all this is if you go through the private well class, the 10-lesson class, you're going to learn enough to be able to ask much better questions for your local sources, whether that be your local health department, your local extension, or a local contractor. And when they understand that you know something about your well, they will treat you differently. Because we have contractors who don't want to give well owners a time of day because they don't think they know anything. Well, you've got to become informed. And then most of all, sample your well. That's the best thing you can do to understand if there are any issues or risks. And so really, our goal is to help well owners understand their well, why it's important, why they need to understand how it works, and what they can do for themselves to protect from risk. Again, as I said at the beginning, you're the water operator for a very small water system, the one that protects you and your family. So it's important that you understand those things. We had over 40 some questions for this webinar. We're going to answer probably 10 to 15 of those here next. And then if you have any questions, it looks like we have at least one. We have a couple. Yeah, we'll answer those at the end. So, and I just said that. So yeah, you can, I forgot to change the slide, Katie, I'm sorry. Katie, Jennifer took over for Katie on one of the past webinars and I used the wrong slide. So yeah, we'll skip that. So we have a really interesting question this time and I didn't know how to deal with it. So like anyone else who's inquisitive, I looked it up. So the question was, have you contacted the Environmental Office of the Indian Nations of Eastern Oklahoma, given the McGirt decision? So when I looked up the McGirt decision, it's a Supreme Court decision in 2020 that said that because Congress gave tribes these lands in Oklahoma and at no point ever took that away from them, that they're still sovereign nations, and any criminal activity committed by a tribal member on tribal land should be dealt with as through the tribe's own criminal justice system. And so the person who did this, his name was McGirt, his lawyer was trying to keep the state of Oklahoma from trying him for a crime. And they said the state had no right because this was the land was provided by the federal government. It had to be federally remediated, if you will. And so the Supreme Court agreed. And in the end, he was tried in federal court and convicted. But this really changed. I mean, what I read is this is the most monumental decision to support tribal sovereignty in over 100 years. So how does that relate to private wells? We've worked with the Cherokee Nation, given presentations out there, and worked with their director of the Office of Environmental Health and Engineering, Billy Hicks. So Billy is not only a civil engineer, but he's also a licensed water operator, and he's an EHP. He's the director of an office that serves the public health interests of the Cherokee Nation, which is huge in Oklahoma. And so I reached out to Billy to ask him about this because I didn't see any relevance for private wells. So he agreed that there really isn't in the McGirt decision itself. And this question lacks from really there should have been the point the person was trying to make isn't clear here. But what Billy said is it doesn't directly apply today, but it really could someday. That, you know, we may get to a point where tribal nations in Oklahoma have jurisdiction on water rights, well drilling, permitting, and all the public health codes, such as a county might have or a state have today. And currently what's going on and what Billy does and Cherokee Nation does is they work hand in hand with all the county health departments in Oklahoma and their state health department, and they do things together, which is, you know, awesome. And so yeah, you know, the goal is the same for everyone, right? To ensure the health of their citizens. And so if you're interested, the other cool thing is Billy's been there 27 years, but he went back to school a few years ago to get a second master's degree in water security. And so he talks about that a little bit we had him on a podcast in May this year. And also it's, you know, water security is made up of three things. It's made up of water quantity, water quality, and water equity. And it's really describes the issue a lot of folks have, tribal or not, in rural areas, maybe lower economic areas, and the problems they have in being underserved. And so it's really interesting stuff. It's drinkingwaterpodcast.org. He did his dissertation on this work, or his master's thesis. So yeah, if you have any questions about that, or you want to talk to Billy directly, I think his information is on our podcast page, or you can email us. So I included this just because I went down this rabbit hole, if you will, and I thought it was worthwhile to share with the rest of us here because it does make a difference, and it was a refreshing story, so to speak. So someone asked, when reading my test results, what does less than 1 really mean? So this is a well analysis from our lab from 2015. And you can see that some things have values and others, like aluminum, it has a less than symbol and then 37. That 37 means that that's the detection limit for the equipment we have for doing water analysis. It's different by constituent. You know, I remember, you know, I've been here a long time. I remember when our arsenic detection equipment couldn't get below 3. And there's other things here where, you know, 25 years ago, the MCL might have been lower than what we could detect it at. But so all these less than signs, and this is a natural water quality. So you can see, like over on the right near the bottom, the hardness is 351. You know, the turbidity and color are pretty high because it's natural groundwater. But, you know, there's no lithium that we can detect, or beryllium or aluminum. And so the only other thing is less than 1. If this is a bacterial analysis, that means they didn't find any colonies, depending on how they tested. And so, you know, the law says for a community water supply, if you have a coliform hit, you don't quantify it. It's a positive or negative. But there's a lot of value, and we see a lot more labs that are actually doing testing to determine the most probable number of colonies that are formed of bacteria through their testing. So because it matters if it's 5 or if it's 200. It could be a sampling error. Somebody contaminated a sample if it's 5, but if it's 200, then there's an issue, and there's bacteria in the water. And so I wasn't sure what you meant there. I'm assuming it's this first thing. And so when you see this on a lab report, a less than sign, no matter what the number is after it, means it's below the detection limit for what the lab can detect. Okay, so yeah, there's a number of questions about chlorine, which we hadn't had as many lately, so this is really interesting. How often should wells be treated with chlorine bleach? I have a whole house filter and a UV light that treats all incoming water. In addition, an RO system for water to kitchen tap and for the ice maker. And I have a 55-foot bored well. So you don't need to use chlorine at all, in my opinion. Chlorine is a disinfectant, and that's what you're using it for, to kill bacteria, which is also why you have a UV light. So if you're filtering your water and running it through a UV, that should be doing the same thing as the chlorine that you might use, which is kill all the bacteria. And yeah, so when you have a bacteria problem and you shock chlorinate the well and the water system, sometimes that doesn't solve the problem. And then if you've tried to do that several times, and this is a person who has no treatment, then we would recommend either continuous chlorine or UV as an alternative. Because if you've got it could be that your well's too close to a feedlot or a septic system, and so one of those things is the source of your bacteria. That's not going to go away, and so your choices are to move your well, drill a new well, or treat your water to kill the bacteria that get in it. And so that, again, this would be our recommendation. You do that by either using a chlorine feed in the water coming in your home continuously, just like a city does. Our water has a chlorine residual all the way to everyone's tap, or you could use UV, which also kills bacteria. Because you have so the way this was written is 55-foot bored/drilled well. I'm assuming it's a bored well, large diameter well. And obviously they can be problematic for contamination, as we've mentioned before. But my question is, you also have an RO unit, and there's no mention of any other constituents here. So did you test before adding all this treatment? Because I don't understand why you have an RO system. And I'm assuming you have a water analysis. If you do, I'd be interested to see what's there or why you added the RO in the first place. So this could be one of those cases I mentioned before where you're trying to be safe, you care about your family, so you just added the RO unit, but there needs to be a reason for doing those things, and at least for most folks. I had my well tested by the Iowa State Hygienic Lab. Results showed total coliform bacteria present, bacterially unsafe. So again, they report not a most probable number of bacteria, but a positive or negative. So if it's positive, that means you need to do something. We've worked with some of the folks at the Hygienic Lab before through the Iowa Drillers Association. And the first thing to do, if you haven't, is ask them what they recommend. They're probably going to recommend some form of shock chlorination disinfection of your well and your water system, which is what we recommend here. So what we did, or what I did, is I looked at about 60 or 70 different documents put out by different states, different universities, different organizations on how to shock chlorinate a well. And the one that I felt was the most comprehensive and gave the most guidance and gave useful information is the one from Minnesota Department of Health, their Well and Water System Disinfection Guide for Private Wells. And so I showed you those resources earlier, like for lesson 1 and lesson 2. Under the resources for lesson 10, which is water treatment solutions, you can find this document there. And there is a newer version of this on Minnesota Department of Health's webpage, but it's not as good. This is like 9 or 10 pages long. They made one that's like 3. And it's somebody's decision that it wasn't marketable, or it wasn't being used as much because it's too long. If you're really serious about taking care of your well, you want to download the 10-page one, because it's got it's very thorough and will help you understand what's going on. This is just one of the pages. It's about mixing here. I mentioned that because you don't pour straight chlorine bleach down your well, whether it's from, it's 5%. Chlorine's an oxidant. If you have galvanized drop pipe going to your pump, or your column pipe coming up, or brass fittings on your pump, any of those things, straight chlorine, when it hits it like that, at 5% chlorine, is going to oxidize and cause some of the metals to get into your water. And so you don't want to do that. You want to mix it so it's around 200 milligrams per liter instead of at 5 or 6%. And so follow this guide. It'll give you all that information. It even tells you what to do with your treatment equipment you already have, whether you need to remove a filter or whether you should bypass your softener, all that sort of stuff. So a little bit more though about shock chlorination, because sometimes it's ineffective, and that can be for a couple different reasons. And so what we recommend is you shock chlorinate your well, and when you do that, the whole process isn't just your well, it's also all the lines in your home. So you pour chlorine, a mixture, into your wells from the top, and then you circulate that water. And that means you turn on a spigot with a hose that you run back into the well, and you just run it through in a circle until it's all mixed up really well. And then once you've done that, then you go into your home and you run every faucet, every shower, every toilet until you smell chlorine. And you should do that right at the end of the night before everybody goes to bed, so it can sit overnight, and the chlorine in your lines will kill any bacteria that may be in a pipe, or in the well itself, or in the line between the house and the well. So you don't know necessarily where the bacteria are coming from. There could be biofilms on one of the pipes in your home, and so that's one of the issues. So sometimes if bacteria have had a chance to build up, there may be layers. It's like a biofilm, and so when you chlorinate, the chlorine's only getting to the top layer and it kills that layer, but then there's another layer underneath. And so you may have to do that 2 or 3 times. So we certainly recommend, before you go to any other trouble or decide that you're going to need to go to permanent treatment like UV, you should try chlorinating a few times first. It may be just that solution. The other problem is there could be a continuous source. I mentioned it earlier. You could have a well that, even though you're not that close or you're within the setback for a septic or a livestock, feedlot, it could be that there's some unique geology just under the ground where there's a thin section of sand that's running near both of those, and that's the simple pathway for water to move from wherever it is around your home or farmstead to your well. And in that case, you're never going to solve it. It's always going to get contaminated, because as you move new water through the system, you have new water coming from that source. And in those cases, you'd need to have continuous disinfection, whether that be chlorine or UV. There's also an issue that chlorine isn't effective above a pH of 8. So if it's ineffective, when you try to do a shock chlorination, you may want to get a water test and see what the pH of your water is. We know that there's ways, in some areas, they recommend adding vinegar to your water when you're doing the shock chlorination event, because that lowers the pH and makes the chlorine more effective. But that's a tricky slope we haven't been able to figure out yet, as far as how much to add. And when you start adding chlorine, it raises the pH, and so you start seeing it's not an exact science, if you will. And it said here, waiting on VT research to get better guidance for well owners. We thought someone was looking at those issues, and they've got grad students working on it, but we haven't heard anything. So there's certainly, it's not a perfect science, is the bottom line here. And lastly, chlorine reacts with, it's an oxidant, so it reacts with things, and it gets used up whenever it's killing bacteria. And so it could be that you have enough bacteria in your system that whenever you turn on all your taps, you never smell chlorine, and that probably means the chlorine's already gone. And so that's another reason to maybe do it a few times. And these are extreme cases. Many times it works just fine, but in Illinois, we do have a lot of water that has a pH over 7.5. And so when that happens, just the way the chemistry is of the water, it forms a different kind of compound when it's in the water, and it's just not effective at disinfecting or killing bacteria. And so there can be issues. There's other types of disinfection. There's a company in Texas that recommends using hydrogen peroxide. It's much more dangerous to use. There's problems with that. It's not something we would recommend for an average homeowner to try to do. And so it's something we're working on, slowly trying to find more information so that we can provide better advice. But in most cases, shot chlorination does what it's supposed to. It's just, and there can be reasons why it won't work. So another question, we got a new water softener, a salt-free treatment system, and was told the well water is now safe to drink. Also have an RO and a blue light system. Is my well water safe to drink without using the reverse osmosis water, the RO unit? So, I mean, a water softener is taking out some of the minerals and adding either potassium or sodium in its place. It softens your water. It doesn't really make it safe or unsafe to drink as far as chemistry goes, or primary health contaminants. I'm going to assume the blue light is UV, which obviously kills bacteria. We've already talked about that. And RO removes a lot of things from your water. It has to be a pretty small molecule to get through there. My question is, again, the same as for the other person who had a comment, what did your water test show? Was your water contaminated? Obviously for UV, you likely have a bacteria problem. But if it's something else like arsenic, then you would use an RO system. But whether you need that or not really depends on whether what your sample results show. And as I mentioned before, I'd be glad to look at those results or talk to you further. If you email us and say, hey, I'd like to talk to you about this, info@privatewellclass.org, I'll give you a call back or an email back, and we can discuss that. So we just bought a home with a well, and I'm looking for general information as we've never had this before. Well, the first thing to do is to sign up for the private well class if you haven't already. Take those 10 lessons, read through them. It'll give you a much better idea of what you're dealing with. You understand, you can hopefully figure out what kind of well you have. Then I would contact the agency in your state that houses your well logs to find out if your well log is available. And if it isn't available, then talk to the previous owner, which I should have put in here, or however else you can try to determine who the driller was, and then see if they have a copy of your well log. Again, it's really important to understand your well construction, well depth, and pump setting to know, okay, if I know I have a 200-foot well that's got a screen at the bottom, that means I have a sand and gravel well. And so then I can go talk to my state geological survey or other resource agency and find out, what do I know about the aquifer that's at 200 feet in my location? I don't know of any state that doesn't have the geology of their state mapped well enough to know what's the principal aquifer in an area, if there is one. And so there's folks who can really help you get to that, and they're more than willing to talk to you. That's what we do here, and we get calls from well owners regularly in Illinois asking questions like, I'm buying this property, what kind of water can I expect? And we can tell them because we have that information. So that's what I do. And again, you should sign up for the class because it will really help you understand the big picture for being a well owner. And some people are like, I'm not going to buy a house if it's got a well. I mean, that's up to you, but it's not an insurmountable problem. In most cases, wells are perfectly fine. They last a long time. One other thing I'd recommend is you start a fund. You're not going to pay a water bill every month like you would if you're on a community water supply. Start a fund and pay yourself a water bill, because eventually a pump will fail or something will happen where you have to dig up a line, and to have that money in place is just, you know, being proactive well owner. Another question, is there a way to check the status of a well when looking at a new home? So this is someone who hasn't bought it yet, but they're looking at it. So there's really a number of things you should do. You should require a water sample be taken before closing and determine what the water quality is. And even if you have to pay for it, it's money well spent. Or ask them if they've had a water sample collected and if they could share the results. Find out if there's any treatment on the house, even a softener or just a paper filter or like a 5-micron filter or something. And if they do, why? What's in the water that they need to have those things? You know, if it's a softener, it's hard water. But if they've got an RO and a UV, then, you know, there's those are heavy duty treatment for solving some kind of problem. I would either hire a well contractor or a home inspector with well experience to perform an inspection of the well. Take a look, is it maintained? Is the cap solid? You know, does it look like there's any damage? How old is it? Is it in a pit? You know, all those things matter. And then I would ask the seller too about the well. How old is it? How deep is it? Do they have a log? Has there been any water quality issues? You know, some states require you to report that. In Illinois, you're required to fill out a document that asks, do you know of anything adverse about your well water or your septic? And if you do, you're legally bound to say yes and what it is. But, you know, every state's different and their rules with buying and selling property. In states like New Jersey and Oregon, Connecticut, and I think there's one other one, it's required by law that for every property sale with a well, there has to be a water sample collected and the results go to the buyer and the seller. And so, you know, so it just varies. Every state's different. And then if they don't have that information, I'd contact the agencies like we talked about before that house the well logs or have water quality data. And it's pretty simple to find that out. You probably have to make 1 or 2 calls to find the right department, if you will, and then see if they have any info on that well or any other wells nearby. A lot of times drillers are very local, and so you might have 1 or 2 drillers that drilled all the wells within, you know, 20 square miles. And as well as those same agencies, if they don't have water quality data for your well, which is probably unlikely, they may have for some other wells, or at least know for this particular aquifer, here's what we know about the water quality. Like if someone were to ask me about the water quality in Tazewell County, I would say whether it's the Mahomet or the Glassford aquifer, which are both sand and gravel aquifers, there's a fair amount of arsenic and you're likely to find it. Not every home has arsenic, but many do in their water. And so things like that, it's worth doing your due diligence if you're gonna, you know, it's the biggest investment in your life probably, right? So it's worth being sure. After the last 2 tropical storms, my well water was a dirty orange color. What does this mean, and is the well contaminated? Well, it certainly could be. And I'd ask you, are you certain that the change in color is associated with those heavy rainfall events? Because if it is, and that's the only time it's happened, then that likely means that there's some pathway from the service to the water that's getting in your well, whether that be into the well itself or into the aquifer from the surface, if it's a shallow aquifer. And, you know, it comes back to the same thing. That orange color could be iron somehow. You know, there's iron that's already been oxidized, and so that rusty color, and now it's getting into back down into the well. I mean, I don't know, but you don't know until you test. And so you really need to test the water. I test it when it's not orange and when it is, and find out if there's a difference or if there's something going on. You know, if your well's pretty shallow and you know it's influenced by surface events, then you just really need to be sampling regularly anyway. Because if you're in a high risk well that's shallow, you know, or old dug well, you need to do your sampling regularly to make sure that something hasn't been introduced to the water that you're drinking. I have a well, but know nothing about it. I've owned it since 2006. The house replaced a cabin in 1996. How do I find out more? State has no records of it. So you already know there's no well record. And so you really only have a couple options. One is you can hire a contractor who could come out and pull the pump and measure the depth. And then if there's any geologic information for the area, you can get an idea of what aquifer you're in that way. And knowing the depth, if you've pulled the pump, it's easy enough to take a water level measurement or have the contractor do it. And you mentioned that you installed a new pump. That would have been the time, honestly, to have the pump installer figure that stuff out for you. And I would ask them, go back to that person and find out if they have any of that information. You know, they surely know how deep they set the pump, but do they know what the depth of water was? Do they have any idea how deep the well might be? They may have measured it and just not said anything, not thinking that, you know, if you didn't ask. But so talk to them for sure. And then I'd also ask them if they have any ideas of who might have drilled the well. Since they're in the business and they would likely be in the best position to know who in that area does drilling. And you mentioned that you told DOE so they could add a record for your well. You could also ask DOE for records of nearby wells. And it may be that there's only one aquifer. Everybody's got a well that's between 180 and 220 feet deep within miles. Then that gives you a good idea of what the likely depth of your well is. And also, Lisa well records in Illinois also include the driller and owner information. And so you might only see one or two drillers that have drilled all the wells nearby. And that may be a way to get to those folks as well. You know, a lot of folks are just out of luck, honestly, to find information about their well without going out and having someone come and measure all that stuff for you, which isn't cheap, right? To pull a pump, and, you know, here it's at least $500 just to pull the pump, doing anything else. So but that's where we're at, and that's the way it is, I guess. So how long does it typically take for rain surface water to filter down into our water table? Okay, so, and I'm going to assume you know the difference between a water table and the aquifer, but I want to explain all that just in case. So it really depends on the soil type and the depth of the water table. You know, one of the counties in Illinois I've worked a lot in has a lot of topography, and we have monitoring wells where the water table is at 4 feet, and we have wells where the water table is at 40 feet. So it's dry for 40 feet. If it's sandy and it's shallow, water could get to the water table, which isn't necessarily the aquifer, within less than an hour. You know, we have some water table wells that are just to measure the water table. They're not necessarily in an aquifer, and we can see when there's rainfall. If we have some of those we have co-located with a rain gauge, we see the water level start to rise within a half hour of a rain event, a big one. And so it's really important to understand what the difference is. You know, in Champaign County where I live, our water table is 7 to 10 feet, but it's all clay soil, and it has no bearing on the aquifer where most of the private wells are in our county, which is around 200 feet or 180 feet, because it's glacial till. It's a clay till for the first 80 feet or so. And even though that's saturated and it's a water table, you couldn't put a well in it and get water out of it. It can't flow into the well quick enough. So if it's a large diameter well and it's in a sandy area, then that's certainly going to be a problem. And you're actually getting the water from your water table, not necessarily an aquifer. The only time in most cases you put in a large diameter bored or hand dug well is because there's no aquifer available for a drilled well, either into bedrock or a sand and gravel. So I want to show a couple of pictures. The picture on the left is of a bedrock well. And so you have this overburden, which is the soil, and it's got its own water table, but you can see the water level in the well is coming up just above the bottom of that overburden. And so the pressure in the aquifer is different than, that's why the water level rises up that high. And so the picture on the right is of sand and gravel well, and this is a really shallow soil layer, maybe less than 10 feet. And so we've shown it on this diagram as dry, but it could also look like the picture on the left and have a little saturated overburden near the bottom. Because, you know, water percolates through the soil at different speeds based on how fine the soil is, and sands, it runs through faster, right, than it would clay or till or silt. And so if you're in an area like along a river bottom where it's all sandy, you know, like the bottoms of the Mississippi River, where St. Louis and on the Illinois side, Alton and all those towns are, that's all very sandy soil. And it's all connected to the river because it's where the old river used to run when the glaciers were melting. It's, you know, it's 15 miles wide, and now the river is less than a mile wide there. So in those areas, you have the water table could very well be an aquifer, but in some cases it's not, and that's kind of my point. But as far as how long that takes, it really depends on soil type to get to the shallow water table. But if you're actually talking about how long does it take to get to an aquifer, you know, this is a diagram that's in our class. It's actually an updated version that's not in the lesson yet, but it will be soon, showing the variety of things you see with depth to water and how quick it takes for water to get either into an aquifer or to eventually make its way to the surface again so that it can become part of the, you know, hydrologic cycle. You know, while it rains, it goes into the ground, it eventually makes its way to a surface water body, makes its way to the ocean, evaporates, and happens all over again. And so with dating, carbon dating and other things, hydrogen dating of water, we can determine how old water is. And even some of our sand and gravel aquifers that are under 2 different layers of aquitards, which are what these gray lines or gray areas are, if water gets through that and down into those lower aquifers, they can be there for hundreds of thousands of years. And so it really just depends on how close you are to the surface, the type of material it's got to go through, and where the discharge points are. You know, if you're really close to where the aquifer discharges, like to a river, then it's not going to be in the ground very long. Whereas if you're in the upland area that's furthest away from a discharge area, you have water that's going to eventually, it could be in there a long time and be very old. Okay, last question. I'm sorry, it's already 3 o'clock. Municipal water supplies add fluoride to the tap water. What should citizens on well water do to ensure that they still get enough fluoride in their daily regimens for dental health, especially for those who have young children? Can it be introduced to well water? So the first thing to do is to test your water if you haven't, because fluoride is a natural occurring constituent in groundwater. It's not real common, and usually it's at low levels, but it could be that you're drinking water that's higher in fluoride than you even need, and that's a risk, right? So what they've determined is that you need 0.7 milligrams per liter at least, and less than 2 to help prevent tooth decay and also not cause other health problems. Above 2, it can cause dental fluorosis, which is basically it can discolor your teeth, especially for kids when they're still in the gum, under the gum line. And so, so what CDC says, it's, you know, you do need fluoride at those levels. There's no doubt it actually prevents tooth decay. It's a wonderful thing that they've discovered in the 40s. But everyone that I looked at, CDC especially, they don't recommend trying to add fluoride to your water or trying to fluoridate your water. It's really too risky because of the narrow range that's healthy. If you're less than that, it's not really doing any good. If it's more than that, it can actually cause more problems for your kids' teeth. So the best thing to do is really, and it's partially dependent on, you know, some families have teeth through their genetics that they don't get cavities very much, all that sort of stuff, where others have real problems. So that plays into it too, but the best thing to do is talk to your dentist about supplements for that. And make sure you're using fluoride toothpaste. Talk to your dentist about that as well. And, you know, communities, it used to be the standard for a community water supply was 1.5. I don't know, less than 10 years ago, they changed that to the lower level because, you know, you hear all kinds of stories about fluoride being a risk. And I actually had someone contact me not too long ago saying they read a book about Hitler using fluoride in concentration camps to keep people docile, which I had no way to answer that question. But what I know based on science is that its benefits are undeniable. It has completely changed. One of the things I read said that before the 1940s or 50s, almost everyone had lost a tooth to decay by the time they were 13. And anyone over 60 or so, when they started doing this in 1962 nationwide, most of those folks didn't have teeth. And look at the way the world is today. It was a game changer for dental health. And, almost every community water supply, which is, over almost 80% of the population, has actually been on fluoride for 40 or 50 years. It's just a thing we don't even understand. We don't even take it for granted because we don't realize it. But it's super helpful. So quickly, since I went too long, I'm going to bring this over here, and we'll go through the questions we get. To ensure potability, safety of water, are there service companies out there that will regularly take care of residential domestic wells, test annually, ensure proper operation of pumps, change out filters? If so, any references? One, being the agency we're at, I can't really recommend anyone, and I wouldn't know in Northern California or the Central Valley either. I know there are companies that do that work. You can have a maintenance contract. And so I'm not sure who to ask. There's probably a state drillers association. In most states, that's called the blank groundwater association. In Illinois, it's Illinois Association of Groundwater Professionals. And so it just, I would reach out to that website and maybe talk to their officers, or if they have, a permanent staff person that's not, a volunteer driller who's in an office position, and see what they have to say. That's my best advice there. Just curious if is there any comment regarding the Food Safety Modernization Act, Produce Safety Rule, and the use of water free of pathogenic organisms for ag water use? I'm not up on that. I'm not into food safety. For example, fertilizer applicators using dedicated domestic wells for their water source for mixing nutrients together are spraying. Any testing frequency requirement that you're aware of for compliance to ensure no pathogenic organisms or other, or tests for each use? I have no idea, and it's not in my bandwidth, unfortunately, to get involved in those things. Most of our program is really about drinking water for private well owners and U.S. citizens through the U.S. EPA. And I realize some of this may be even U.S. EPA. It's probably more FDA issues, but yeah, I'm not aware of. I know there's more and more restrictions. They've made rules. It's the water has to be better for dairy cows than it does for us. Things like that. But I'm not up on that on the ag side. I just, I grew up on a farm, but I haven't been on a farm for 40 years. So I don't have an answer for you. What about having the wellhead casing located inside a building? Pros and cons. Well, if you have a small well house, some people do that to protect it. But if you've got a submersible pump, then you either have to have a way to get the roof off, and it needs to be short enough that, a pump truck that, it's got a flat bed that may be as much as 5 feet over ground, it still has to be able to get over that to pull that pump out. Or you need to find a way to make that building more portable. We had a well house, but I had a shallow hand dug well. And the well house was concrete blocks, and it was there so that we could keep a heater in it in the winter. So our pipes didn't freeze. And if our electricity went out, we use electric tapes around all the pipes normally. But if the electricity went out, which it did frequently, we had to run down there, which is 100 yards from our house, on a January -2-degree night in Illinois, to start a propane tank and keep it running there. And sometimes that would run out of gas and our pipes would freeze and bust. So yeah, as far as having a building, it needs to be just a building for the well. And, you know, it needs to, again, if you have a suction pump, it's at the surface, then that's a different animal. Then you could certainly have a permanent building, because you don't need a rig for anything necessarily. Yeah. I've had some difficulty finding clear indications of what products will treat for arsenic. My 14-year-old RO system is beginning to be difficult to find replacement filters for. Any suggestions? You know, there's a lot of systems out there. I don't know enough about the individual systems, but the two things that remove arsenic are RO systems and those cartridge filter systems, and it's ANSI NCF standard 53 and 58. I would make sure if you go to like NSF's website, you can look for things just under those standards and see what's available. And that's, yeah, you might want to check out the Water Quality Association's website too, WQA.org. And, you know, they have a ton of information about different systems. They represent all the companies that make all those devices. They can't recommend anyone either. That might be your best bet. We have a chlorine feeder iron filter installed to remove our high iron levels. Does the chlorine used in this process also treat our water, making it safe to drink, or would this be achieved with a separate treatment system? I would assume that you know, the chlorine's an oxidant. Again, it's helping the iron come out of solution and become the little red solid that you're pulling out, so it can be filtered. But I'm pretty sure that that form of chlorine is the same, and it's really, if there's any bacteria there, it's also killing it. But you know, whoever put this system in for you, you should ask them to be sure. I'm not a treatment professional. I don't think you need a separate system. I'm pretty sure you're treating the water because it's all the water coming in your home. So yeah. Yeah. All right. Sorry I ran over. I appreciate everyone who stayed. That's all we have for today. So thank you.